Hi, it's Dennis here, and this is a living light tutorial. It's probably the most exciting tutorial I've ever done because today we're going to take a look at the art of creating an orb. Many of you know that my favorite light painting project is the ball of light, which is my take on an orb. When I very first started light painting in 2009, Flickr was my go-to place, and right there on Flickr was some of the great masters of our art form creating orbs that completely mesmerized me. Ever since then, they've kind of been my go-to thing for light painting. I've been on a journey of trying to not so much perfect the orb, but certainly take it and do different things with it. Different colors, different textures, and most importantly, putting it in exciting and fun places. This is not going to be a 2-minute quick overview of how to create an orb. I suppose you could look at this as an orb spinning masterclass. So buckle in, because this could be a long one, but I'm telling you, right at the end of it, you're going to have all of the tips and tricks and skills you need to go out and hopefully create something that looks more like an orb than a pumpkin or an egg, which for a very, very long time is what I used to create. So let's get into it. So I can't really start any tutorial about orbs without talking a little bit about the background of orbs and why I started spinning them and what they mean to me. A lot of the images that you see of mine look like daylight. Put simply, the reason that that happens is because I'm in there creating the orb for what is always about the same, about 60 seconds, and you'll see why in a little while. But those images that look like daylight, they tend to be 3, 4, and even sometimes 5-minute exposures. So early on in my light painting journey, when I was out in the countryside learning how to light paint, I was also there doing some other stuff. I was there trying to mend myself and deal with some mental health issues. So what I discovered is that when you're in a light painting image for 60 seconds, but it's a 5-minute exposure, when you're away for a night or a weekend or even longer, you have a lot of time to sit around and relax. So orbs for me became not only a bit of sort of therapy, I suppose, but it became a meditation. The actual process of spinning an orb is pretty meditative. It's pretty robotic as well. It's different from making blades or doing other types of work. You get into this really basic rhythm. Now this is if you want your orbs to be round and not all wonky. If you're looking for that perfect sphere, it becomes meditative for 60 seconds. It just becomes a sort of like a meditation for me. So we can't really get into it without talking about tools. In order to create an orb, you need a light source, and it needs to be on the end of something, and it needs to spin in a circle basically, because that's all an orb is. It's a series of circles that join when you rotate into a sphere. So you need a light on the end of a cable. Now, most people know that I created and use a pretty elaborate tool. We'll get into that in quite some detail later on in the tutorial. But it's really, really important for me, for everyone watching this, to understand that you can create great orbs with incredibly simple things. So it doesn't really get much simpler than this. This is a really cheap $2 torch. I've got a bit of cellophane over the end. This is purple cellophane. And so what will happen with this is we turn it on and we start spinning and we get an orb. So that is about as cheap as it gets. There's maybe a total of $3 worth of stuff there. You can use all sorts of different things. This is a glow stick, basically. It's a LED glow stick on the end of a piece of string. You'll see how that works. You can also bundle together Christmas lights and all of those amazing things. But today is about the process. I want you to go away from this tutorial and walk away, and whatever it is you use, whether it's something that's $2 or $200, and feel confident in the process of creating an orb. Something else that's really important for me during this tutorial is I don't want it to just be the process. I want to go through, you'll see on the camera, all of the different settings that I do and why I do those. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to think about the background. It is a lot easier to do light painting in the dark because we're only dealing with a couple of things. As soon as you include the environment, whether it's inside in a massive place like this or outside when you're in nature, I'm going to talk to you about how to include that background as well. All right, so let's think about some basics. Let's think about exactly what an orb is. An orb is a series of light painted circles, and you rotate and those circles turn into an orb. So here's a really great way to start thinking about it. If all we're doing is creating a circle and rotating around to create the orb, then here's a good way to start thinking. If I take this and I put my hand above the light on the ground and hold it as still as I can, we think about this here as being the radius of our first circle. So once we get it spinning, there's a whole lot of different ways that we can stand, but I just want to think about this to start with. I'm looking down at the light that's on the ground and my hand is directly above it. And if my hand never moves from above that light and stays in fundamentally the same place in the air, I'm going to continue to create circles above that spot on the ground. And nothing will change. You'll just get a nice circle. So when we're starting to create our orb, if all we think about is keeping this point here in our hand above that point on the ground, and we start to rotate, and my hand continues to stay above that light on the ground, what's going to happen? We're going to keep going around and we're going to get ourselves an orb. So how do we become a cropper? Well, that's something that we can think about. Really all that can happen, really what can happen to make our orbs go wrong is really one of only two things. Either the point where our hand is can move to the side away from that point on the ground and we start spinning there, but we still try and move around that point that's on the ground. And you'll see in an example in a bit how that comes out. The other thing that can happen is that the point that our hand is, so if I take the light back, if I take our light source back over the light, is if our hand is moving up and down, because as we're spinning, that will give us a different shape up and down, and I'll show you an example of that as well. But fundamentally all we want to be thinking about is this point here of our hand being above the light on the ground. That's it. And when I'm giving lessons on how to spin an orb, this is the thing that we just do. It's like anything. It's like when you're playing tennis, you do 1,000 serves to get the ball in. It's almost like it's like muscle memory or any of those things. But all I'm doing is I'm looking down, and you'll see later on some methods that I use for that. So that's the first part of spinning an orb. It's just getting the hang of that. Creating a circle in air with your hand above a point on the ground. Pretty simple, in theory. That's the very first thing we want to be thinking about, is that. So what's the next thing? Well, once we've got our circle, we need to rotate. And this is the hardest part, or this is the most difficult part, I think, of spinning a really nice orb, is how we turn around the light on the ground. I have a method that I use. I stand to the side of the light, and I rotate around this way, like that. Nothing ever changes. I've been doing it like this for years. It hasn't changed, and I don't know if it ever will. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that method in a bit. So this is how I go around like that. Now, I know that there's a lot of people that do this. They stand face on, and they go around this way, like that. It will work. Of course it will work. It will always work if your hand stays above the light. So no matter what you do, whether it's this way, or it's this way, or if you're left-handed, that's what killed myself there. So those are the fundamentals. All we're doing, we're going around a point on the ground, swinging our light in a circle, and rotating around in some method. So really what I want to do here in this next little bit is I want to focus on our feet. For me, it's the thing I focus on the most when I'm spinning. I think if you can get this together as a basis, like literally it's kind of our foundation of our spinning, I think it's a great place to start. So I've got the lights cranked up in here, obviously, to get a bit of video, so we're not going to grab any stills yet. But what I'll do is we'll focus on our feet. What I do is I draw an imaginary line. I draw an imaginary line through the middle of my feet and out to the light there. So I'm looking down, and no matter where my feet end up, every time I step, I draw a line through the middle of my feet, and I'm fine. Now, you'll see in a minute that there's a few variables there, but let's think about that. So each time I'm moving around the light, each time I move, my foot stops and there's a line through there. I bring the other foot around, I bring that foot around, there's a line through the middle of the light there. I come around, and each time I step, you can see that the position of where my feet go is exactly the same every single time. Now, when I'm out in a field or in the dirt or in the sand or wherever I am and I'm spinning, what happens is we end up with two perfect tracks around the point on the ground because my feet have gone in exactly the same place. Now, you'll see in a bit that that's actually how I decide or that's how I correct different shapes that I get in my orbs. So I'm going to get a light going here. Now I've got it on nice and bright so that you can see it. Going over the top of the light. Now, one of the reasons that I'm not showing this in slow motion is I want you to get a feel for how fast things are moving. And we'll talk a little bit about head speed in a minute. But I want you to look at my feet, and I'm just going to rotate in the motion that I do. Now, I'm still looking down. Now, the position that I stand in is my right eye is actually looking down through my hand and down to the light, and I'm watching the light, the head of the tool going over the top of my light on the ground. And so I know that the central point of our circle, like we talked about before, is right above the top of the light. But you'll see that my feet are exactly the same every time. Now, the interesting thing, and you may have noticed, is that each time the head goes over the top of the light, it matches the motion of my feet, which is a fascinating thing, really. But it's robotic. I'm looking down through my hand. I can see the central point of our circle, which is kind of my hand in this instance. And it's just methodical. I'm looking down, watching the light going over the top of my point on the ground. My feet are doing exactly the same thing every single time. Now, what happens is when people come to me and they say, oh, my orbs are not round. They either look like a pumpkin or they look like an egg. Well, what happens is this. The point of your hand moves away from the center of the spin. Now, for me, the way that happens is if I change it so that I'm changing it so that rather than the center line of my foot being across the light, it's like my toe is, or the back of my heel is. So if either one of those things happens, you'll end up with either a pumpkin or an egg. And it took me ages to figure that out. And I'll show you in a bit when we turn the lights off what happens with that. So yeah, so here's with my toe. So what I know because of this is I know that the center point of my circle is not over the top of that light. And I'll show you what that looks like with the lights off. Now if I go the other way, if I'm stepping too far forward, the same thing will happen. I know, because I'm looking down through my hand, I know that that's not going to be right. I keep going back to the norm, I keep going back because it's just so automatic for me. So that's how my feet work when I'm spinning. It's exactly the same, it's robotic. Now, I'm not saying that this is the right way to spin, or how to move your feet. Like I was saying at the beginning, everyone has a really different way of doing it. Now, if you do it this way, if you stand face on to your central point, it doesn't matter how you rotate around it. All that matters is that you're looking down and your finger, or however you hold your tool, is right above that light. It doesn't matter, and it will be exactly the same. And well, sorry, it won't. So long as your hand is above that point on the ground, it'll be fine every single time. But this is the natural way for me. Going backwards, funnily enough, and spinning my tool backwards. I've tried going forwards. I'll try it. I can't do it. I literally cannot go around forwards, which is so funny. It's very warm in here. So there you go. So that's my feet. That's the position of my feet. That's how my feet work. It doesn't matter what tool I use, what method, or what I'm doing. That is exactly how it works every single time. Excellent. The next thing I want to focus on is what my hands are doing while I'm doing it. So I'm just going to reposition the cameras and we'll take a look at that. All right, the next thing we're going to take a look at is the position of our hands. Now, we've seen our feet. Feet are locked in. You just get into that robotic motion and you're fine. So as our feet are the foundation, our hands are kind of the pivot, literally. That's where it all happens. You know, our feet, no, it doesn't matter what our feet are doing. If our hands are doing this, it's hard to keep a routine. You know, the idea of keeping a really tight orb in a tight circle is we need this central point here. We need, you know, remember we talked before, you know, our tool is above the point on the ground and our hand is the central part. And so we kind of need that to be locked off. Now I'm going to show you how I do it. Like I keep saying, there's a whole lot of different ways that this can happen. There's a whole lot of different ways to spin in that, but I'm just going to show you how I do, and you can take it from there. So, feet are locked in. I'm looking down through the central point, through my hand, and down to the point on the ground, right? Now, this is what I do. I lock you can see my arm is locked in, my wrist is almost locked in onto my hip, and when I'm turning, my wrist is on my hip. It's in the same position every single time. It doesn't move. And the only thing that's changing is my fingers. Now, if my wrist is locked into place, there's absolutely no way that my fingers are going anywhere. It just ain't gonna happen. Now, you'll be able to see, and again, for the purpose of the tutorial, I'm not gonna do this in slow motion because I want you to see the natural movement of my hand. And you can see my finger is quite relaxed, right? Now this is using the ball of light tool, so you know it changes a little bit if you're using a different tool. But what I'll do is I'll go over for the purpose of the exercise and let me grab this guy. So here we are. So I've got our here's this guy. So here's a piece of string. Here's our piece of string. Whoa! Here's our really basic, ultra basic light with a piece of string. And all I'm doing with that is I wrap my finger around it like that. All right. Same thing. This is like a $3 light and a piece of string. But you can see that my motion is exactly the same. Look at my hand, it's doing the same thing. My feet are doing the same thing, my hand's doing the same thing. And we'd end up with a pretty good orb, I think, from this light. Now, if you don't use the method I do and you stand straight on like this, it's the same thing. I'm looking down and I'm looking at the light. Look at that. I bet you that would be an orb. But for me, I do it this way and I know it will be right. But the process is the same. Hand is above the light, feet are doing the same thing, wrist is locked into my waist. It's funny, it's all very serious this, but it's quite serious. This is an orb spinning masterclass. Got to be serious about these things, I think. Anyway, I'll put that back and I'll go back to the tool. Now, it's really important for you to understand that by watching this tutorial and by doing this tutorial, I'm not suggesting for a second you need a tool like this. I'm just using it because it's a great way for me to demonstrate all the different things that I need to demonstrate. All right, so we're back. Wrist is locked in, feet are locked into position, and we're good to go. Okay, so we've looked at our foot position, we've looked at our hand position. Let's have a bit of a chat about head speed. So one of the things that I see all the time, not only when I'm at workshops, but when I go out and I see people spinning, is I look out across the room and I see this. People just trying to go as fast as possible spinning it, right? For a whole lot of reasons, I think just letting the natural momentum of the head work is good. You know, if you slow down too much, the head's going to go sloppy, right? And it's just going to drop around and it's not going to work. But I think there's a balance, and for me that balance is, what's a good way to describe it? For me, the balance is letting the momentum of the head keep it upright. You know, I think it's natural that if you so for me, the natural speed is just letting the momentum of it go. I don't want to be putting any force into it. You know, you want to let it just be nice and natural and smooth. It's difficult to describe really what the best head speed is as such, but yeah, don't overdo it. Don't try and force it. If anything happens, you're going to have a really sore wrist, that's for sure. So I keep it. I just have a natural speed that I end up at, and it lets me focus on other things. All right. So I want to have a bit of a chat to you about a couple of things that I see when we're doing workshops and we're doing events where people come a cropper. Here's the big one: is getting tangled up, right? And I say tangled up because you're not really getting tangled up as such. I mean, it doesn't matter how you're holding whatever the tool is that you're using. You know, when you buy a ball of light tool, there's a 20-minute online tutorial on the intricacies of how to hold this particular grip. But here's one of the things that happens all the time when I watch people is they're moving around, but the tool is kind of staying there, and what happens is they end up clobbering themselves in their head. And it seems that some people can kind of get that or not, but here's what's happening. You've got to focus on being able to control where the head is going. Now, I can stand here in a spot like this, and I can bring the head around and almost go around my body like that. It's difficult to describe how I do that. I suppose what I'm doing is I'm using my finger or my wrist action to bring it round. And so I think a good practice or a good way to get really good at that is literally lock yourself into a position, and if you can just stand and spin with it in one spot, whatever your tool is, standing in one spot, and then naturally when you move, it will move with you. Now you just got to be able to control that. You have to be able to control where it's going, whether it's coming with you or staying back. So that's one of the things that happens. The other is, like I was saying before, when you get like a what's called a double orb or a pumpkin looking orb, that is purely a function of the center line. The center line, so we're looking down at the dot on the ground, is your center of your spin being off to the side. So that there, it's hard, you might be able to see it there or not, but it's off to the side. So if I'm going around it, right, and you can see there, looking on this camera here, that I'm going to start spinning there. And so if you imagine, if I'm spinning around here like this, you're going to get a double orb. It's not going to be round. You've got to be over the top of it. So if you find that you're getting a pumpkin shaped orb, you just need to make sure that that center point is above the dot on the ground. That's that. If you're getting a double top, so you get a circle in the top and not in the bottom, that is just a function of your circle being over on an angle. So if I'm putting this over on an angle like that, right, you may be able to, I'm exaggerating it so you can see it, and I'll show you an example of that. It's probably a bit tricky to see. It's just not upright, so your circle has to be upright. And I'll point straight towards that camera there. Now that's quite sort of upright. Now I'm going to go over on an angle like that. So if you're going around like that, that's it. You're going to have a double top, and in this case probably a double bottom. So that's about keeping it upright. Now that really is just a, you know, if you're trying to force the head, if you're forcing the direction of it, if you're not just letting the momentum of the head guide, in my case, you can see here it's just guiding my finger. I let my finger almost come out, almost, so that the tool goes flying off. So that's really good. So that's another one. All right. So I think we've got that down pat. I think we've got that pretty sorted. I think we've got our feet on the ground, we've got our wrists locked in, we're not spinning too fast. Let's bloody spin some orbs, shall we? All right, so most cameras today have the ability in manual to go to 30 seconds. Olympus cameras go to 60 seconds. Different manufacturers do different things. But here's the deal. If you've made it this far through the tutorial, it means you're a little bit serious, and you should have some sort of remote control. This guy here sits on top of the camera, plugs into the side of the camera, and allows you to take complete control of it. So I know that when I'm spinning an orb, I'm spinning for 60 seconds, so I've got to be going for longer than that. And if you want to get that amazing daylight kind of view that you get in some of my images, you need to be going real long, like 2, 3, 4 minutes. So you just got to have one of these. It's that simple. But even the most basic opening and closing of the shutter is great. A lot of cameras today will tell you how long it's been open for, so that's perfect. So get into a bit of that action. So yeah, something like that is great. Now, I'm not going to use that for our tutorial today, because this camera can go to 60 seconds. Okay, let's start thinking about some camera settings. It's time for us to start spinning some orbs. So what we're doing tonight is I'm going to use camera settings that pretty much any lens will do. We're going to start on f5.6, ISO 200, or whatever your native ISO is, and 60 seconds. Now, you can do 30 seconds if your camera, if that's what your camera will do, but I know for me to spin a decent orb, it's got to be 60 seconds, and I'll explain to you why in a minute. So I'm going to set up. We're going to turn the lights off, which is going to be a little tricky for shooting video, but you're going to hear my voice a lot. And you're going to see the back of the camera a lot, and you're going to see the results of the shots a lot. So that's enough of me for a little while. You're going to get used to my voice for a bit, and you're going to see a lot of the back of the camera and hopefully some really tight orbs. But what we're going to be doing for sure is seeing some of the results that we're getting on the back of the camera, and we're going to make some adjustments to allow for that. Yeah, I'll see you in a minute. So it's time to start spinning some orbs. We've already pre-focused on our spot here on the ground. I've picked my color for my orb, and we've got the camera over here set up. Now we have, what are our settings here? We've got 60 seconds, f7.1, and ISO 200. Let's just double check that. Yep, ISO 200, f7.1 for 60 seconds. Now I've put a delay on the start. If you don't have an orb tool that you can switch off and on, like I can with this one, you need to give yourself a bit of a delay so that you can get out there and start spinning before the shutter opens. But anyway, let's get a shot underway. So we've got a 12-second delay. I've remembered to be on manual focus. So I'm out here and I get my spin underway, and let's see how we go. So the shutter's open. I'm not speeding. doing. So I'm looking down at my light on the ground. Normally I would actually have a coin because, you know, or a stone or something like that. I wouldn't normally have a light. So I'm looking down, I'm watching the light go over the top of my spot. My feet are going around in the motion that we were looking at before. Now, a question I get all the time is how many times do I go round? Well, I go round 3 times. Now, I don't always count that, but I know that I go round about 3 times. But here's something really fascinating that I've found. The speed that you see me going, my foot motion, the spin motion, I know that I can go 1, 2, 3, with the motion of my steps, 4, 5, 6, and I almost can get 60 seconds instantly. And I think that shutter closed. It did. Let's see what we've got. Okay, well that looks pretty good. If we, I'll bring it up. I mean, that looks really nice. I mean, it's a good tight sort of a spin. Now here's an interesting thing. In here you can see my arm, I think. I didn't bring a long sleeve top today, so it's a little tricky. I can see my arm in a few of the shots. Look, it looks quite nice. I'm pretty happy with it. It's not as full as I would have liked, but it looks okay. Now let's look at a few things. Why is it not full? Well, it's not full because I didn't go round. I was mucking around a bit. I didn't go round as much as I would often go round. But what you find is that sometimes in a series of 5 or 6 spins, I will go round again. I will have to go again in order to fill it in enough. So that's something to think about. It's very green in the background because there's 2 emergency exit signs here. That's where all the green's coming from, which is interesting. When we have workshops here, we cover that up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go again because I want you to see what happens if when it fills in a little bit. So I'm going to go again, same settings. But I'm going to go out and I'm going to really focus. I'm going to focus on, now this is interesting, you watch this. I'll wait for the, okay, and the shutter's open, so I'm going to count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. No, I won't count because I want to explain something. So I'm not changing a lot, apart from the fact that we're going again, and you watch what happens. It'll be different, it'll be filled in. Each spin is like a fingerprint. I like to think about that. It's like a fingerprint. No 2 spins are ever the same. Now I'm just going to listen for the shutter. All right, let's have a look at that. It's a lot fuller, which is cool. So let's just hit play. Here we go. So you can see we've got the strip up here, and in this one it's just a lot fuller. Okay, so what we want to do now is I want to change a couple of settings so that you can see what happens. Now I can adjust the brightness on this tool. I'll show you. So I can adjust the brightness on this tool. So if the tool was, if our orb was not as bright as we would have liked, I can brighten it up. But the reason I'm not going to do that is because I want to show you what changes in the camera will do. So we were at f7.1. Here's the golden rule. Aperture controls the artificial light and shutter speed controls the ambient light. Now the best way to think about that is when we're out and we're shooting the moonlight, if we want the moonlight to illuminate the background, we leave the shutter open for a lot longer, but the aperture will always control the artificial light. I'm going to go right down to f5.6. f5.6, and I'm going to go again. So I haven't adjusted the power of, I haven't adjusted anything on the tool. So if you're using something like Christmas lights or the that little LED light that we had before, the green one, you'll need to be adjusting the aperture to control those things. So I think we're open. Haven't adjusted the power of the tool, only adjusted the aperture. The shutter, the length of the exposure is the same. And off we go. I should count how many times I go around. One of the tricky things about mirrorless cameras is that they don't make a real true shutter sound. Okay, so that was the shot before. Opening up the aperture, obviously the background, everything is going to be a little brighter, but you can see our tool is also effectively brighter. All right, so what I'm going to do for the purpose of the exercise, let's go all the way to f2.8. Now our background is going to be really bright this time, that's just the part of the. All right, so I've gone all the way down to f2.8 because I want you to see that without adjusting the power of the tool, or the brightness, the effective brightness of or the real brightness of the tool, that we get an effective increase in brightness. Obviously everything else is going to be a lot brighter too. Yeah, look at that. There's a huge difference there. Wicked. So we can see, I'm just going to zoom in a bit. So we'll just zoom in and you'll be able to see that the top there, it's not too bad actually. I mean, we'll be able to pull most of that back in post. But yeah, what you can see is you can definitely see my hand in there. Right, so let's go through them. So let's have a look. So I'll play, I'll put the info on. Okay, so that one is at f2.8. That one's at f5.6 and that one's at f7.1. So you can see the difference. We're getting a it's effectively much brighter on the tool. So that is how you correct things like blown out top of the, that's how, if you're finding that your orbs, you're getting a blown out part at the top, increase your aperture is the key to that. So we've seen that aperture adjusts the brightness of the tool. Obviously some tools like the ball of light tool, you can adjust the brightness of the head to compensate for those sort of things. But I'm just going to leave it at its lowest setting because it kind of works. All right, now what I'm going to do is we're just going to go in and we're going to adjust. Whoops, we're just going to adjust our aperture back to f5.6 because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some of the problems that we have if we. All right, so you've seen me spin a couple of really good orbs, right? But that just sort of is automatic. What I'm going to do this time is I'm going to try and take the center line way off of so I'm moving my hand quite a way back from the light that's on the ground. So I was saying before the importance of making sure that your hand is over the top of the light. What I'm doing is I can see really clearly looking down that my hand is not. It's off by about, I don't know, 100 mil or something like that. So in theory, what we'll get at the end of this exposure is a double orb or a pumpkin, which will be quite interesting because my natural thing is not to do that, obviously. All right, let's take a look at that. There you go. So that's a classic double orb. And the way that has happened is because I'm looking down and my hand is not over the top of the light. So if I came to the camera and I saw this, you know, that classic sort of double rim around the edge there, all I've got to do is shift my hand position above the light forward or back. And so the best way to do that is just to experiment. So just try moving forward or moving back and see what happens. But the most important thing is if you keep your feet in that position, if you keep your feet religiously going around in a rhythmic, robotic way, then you can be sure that moving your hand, either moving your hand a little bit forward or a little bit back should make quite a substantial difference. Okay, so that's a double orb. It's quite a good one actually. All right, so I've grabbed my LED glow stick. So let's have a crack with that. because I think what's going to happen with this is it will be way overexposed, and then we'll get the opportunity to use the aperture to compensate for that. All right, so this is a perfect reason. So I've got the 12-second delay on, which gives me time to get out here, take a look down, and get things together with my positioning. All right, so I can see the shutter's about to open now. All right, so I'm looking down, concentrating on my hand position, concentrating on my foot position. I can see already this is an incredibly bright thing, so I know that when we get to the back of the camera, it'll look really overexposed. And so what we will do is we'll increase the aperture and bring it back. I think it may be just fine, which would be just my luck. All right, there we go. Ah, cool. Okay, so let's have a look at that. So it's a really good example. So this is incredibly overexposed. There's no part of that that looks nice at all. It's just ugly all the way. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm not gonna muck around. Let's have a look at what f-stop we were on. F5.6. We'll stay at 60 seconds. I'm going straight to F11. Let's see what happens. F11. Got my 12-second delay on, so it gives me time to get out here and get spinning. All right, let's take a look at that. There we go. Straight away. From F5.6, I think we're at, to F11, and look at that. It's not blowing out at all. That's really quite a cool sort of orb, really. I quite like that. Except you can see, yeah, you can see at the top there, I got a bit of movement out of my hand, but that doesn't matter. I mean, God. So we've looked at some technique around control of the feet, control of the hands, kind of what happens if you move forwards or backwards and you get those double orbs. We've looked at how aperture controls the brightness of our tool if we don't have the ability to adjust the brightness, and the length of exposure controls the amount of ambient light that we get in. I want to take a look at some aspects around tools that have the ability to have adjustable brightness. So if you don't own a ball of light tool, it doesn't mean you need to switch off. A lot of the theory around this next part of what we're going to talk about, you can relate to blades or anything that you put a torch into, and you can adjust the power of that torch, which is pretty much any torch these days.